Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, meeting number 20. Orders of the day, pursuant to Standing Order 108, Bracket 2, a study of the recall of vehicles manufactured by the Toyota Motor Corporation. Joining us again today from Toyota Canada Inc. is Mr. Stephen Beatty, Managing Director, and from Toyota Motor Corporation, Minoru Tanaka, General Manager, Underbody Design. Just for the information of committee members, Mr. Tanaka has a translator, and we will have a bit of a delay between question and response. And I would ask that members, perhaps if they want to preserve the most time for their questions, would want to keep their questions as short as possible for the second translation. I understand, Mr. Beatty, you have an opening comment, and then we'll move to question and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the committee has indicated that it wants to follow up on the matters that were discussed at the last hearing, and you also requested the presence of someone with a technical understanding of the pedals used in Europe and Canada. And for that reason, I'm joined here today by Mr. Minoru Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka is a veteran body engineer who's been with Toyota since 1984. Since joining Toyota, his work has focused on underbody design engineering, and currently he is general manager of the division that is responsible for design of these aspects of all Toyota, Scion, and Lexus models. Also, since March 16, when we appeared before the committee, Toyota has made substantial progress toward completing the recalls that are the subject of your review. And I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to update members on developments, and then Mr. Tanaka and I will answer any remaining questions you may have. When Toyota was last here, I said that we were confident that a review of the facts in this case would bear out the conclusion that we had never put profit before the safety of our customers. We also confirmed that our customers, Parliament, and the general public could be assured that the remedies we offered were simple, robust, and above all, effective. In other words, that Toyota vehicles are both safe and long-lasting, and that our customers can be confident that the company stands behind the product and supports their needs long after they've left the showroom. Several questions arose at the last committee hearing, and Toyota was asked to respond to those questions and to provide certain information items. This was a substantial body of work, but I can report that we have collected, translated, and provided the responses back to the committee. That has taken time, but hopefully members of the committee have received copies of that material. Toyota holds the safety of our customers paramount. We believe we've taken appropriate steps to ensure that issues arising in the Canadian marketplace are investigated, assessed, and fixed. These are complex issues with which all manufacturers are challenged, but we believe our response to these issues is in keeping with the actions of other members of the industry. However, we're striving to be an industry leader in this regard. We've tried to go above and beyond to ensure that Canadians retain confidence in our brand, and that trust, of course, is central to the health of our business. As a result, we've taken steps to ensure that repairs are carried out quickly and efficiently with the least inconvenience to our customers, that regular updates are provided to regulators, the media, and the public about the progress of campaigns and other information related to them. And we've established an enhanced quality and safety structure and process with Canadian representation. And finally, we continue to meet and more significantly aim to exceed the requirements of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act in addressing the issues, other issues as they arise. It's fair to say that differences in vehicle architecture, climatic, or other environmental conditions, issues of maintenance or wear and tear, as well as various human factors, make it difficult to infer that an issue encountered in one part of the world will necessarily translate to vehicles operated in a different region. But as for Canada, we had no reports of sticking pedals until late last fall. We moved quickly to address the issue, and in addition to issuing the recall, Toyota suspended production and delivery of vehicles until a remedy could be delivered to the marketplace. We then undertook the most comprehensive and rapid rollout of a recall campaign in our history, and today completion stands at over 88%. We're encouraged by this result, and we're aiming for 100% completion. Now, we understand that public expectations are growing, and as we noted in our last appearance before committee, Toyota has committed to the creation of a new safety and quality structure in North America with a greater role in safety determinations. Since that time, a Chief Quality Officer has been appointed, committees established, an independent advisory panel, including a senior Canadian representative, appointed, and our individual corporate entities across North America are all looking at our internal procedures to find potential areas for improvement. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tanaka and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Volpe, 7 minutes.
Thank you. I wonder if I could clarify some things before we begin the time.
Sure.
I think the committee had invited some members from the department to be sitting here. Are they here?
We have members from Transport Canada that are here, and if we need to have questions of them, we'll invite them to the table.
Okay, no, that's good. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I just wanted to do that. Now, it may be that during the course of my interventions, one of my colleagues may substitute me, and I just want to give you advance warning, and committee members as well, that we might be sharing some time, even though that won't be formalized.
That's fine.
Is that fair enough?
You bet.
Can we begin?
Begin.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Beatty, Mr. Tanaka. Mr. Beatty, there's just something that you said a moment ago that causes me to look very seriously at some of the things that we did. And I assume that you're familiar with the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, Section 10.
In general, yes.
Okay, well, there's a particular quote, and I'll quote it from it, that a company that manufactures, sells, or imports any vehicle shall, on becoming aware of a defect in the design, construction, or functioning of a vehicle or equipment that affects or is likely to affect the safety of any person, cause notice of the defect to be given in a prescribed manner to the minister and drivers. So, in view of what you just said, when did Toyota become aware of the defect resulting sticky pedals?
So, Mr. Chairman, I was notified on January 20th that the determination had been made that a safety defect existed, and we moved immediately the following day to issue the notice of defect.
That's January 20th, 2010.
That's right.
However, in a letter dated February 19th, 2010, that's to the head of recalls, defect investigation, Transport Canada, and it contains a comprehensive chronology of the recall process. You state in the letter that between March of 2007 and June of 2008, Toyota received reports of sticky pedals in the Tundra model. And in that same letter, you say that the material of the friction lever, PA46, was susceptible to humidity. Did you then issue a notice of defect to Transport Canada?
No, the conclusion at the time from engineering was that it did not constitute a safety defect, but simply resulted in notchiness in the pedal.
I realize that you chose to consider this to be a drivability issue, and as you say, unrelated to safety, an assumption or a conclusion that was later changed. But in the testimony of the committee on the date that you mentioned, March 18th, the Deputy Minister of Transport addressed the issue of, you'll recall that I asked about safety-related defects and the lack of a clear definition. There currently isn't one under the Act, but she made reference to judicial decisions, and she did refer in that context to the Department's guidelines for enforcement and compliance of a compliance policy for defects. Let me just refresh your memory on some of this. The guidelines also state that, quote, a safety-related defect is generally one that is common to a group of vehicles of the same design or manufacturer, and that these defects are likely to affect the safe operation of a vehicle without providing any prior warnings to the vehicle operator or user. Therefore, the defect poses a risk to the vehicle operator, occupants, and others. In its examples of safety-related defects, it clearly states, and I quote, accelerator controls that may break or stick, end of quote. Now, Mr. Beatty, could you explain how, based on these guidelines, you would not have issued a notice of defect? How could you justify that?
Well, again, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act and regulations provide, not just the general guidelines, but very specific guidelines with respect to testing of various vehicle components and so forth. The whenever we have complaints, those are reviewed against the provisions of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act and regulations.
And you're saying that the department didn't ask you to do anything more than what you did?
The determination of the safety defect, within the terms of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, is something in the first case left to the determination of the manufacturer and subject to review by the department.
So because you chose it to consider it as a drivability issue, then you could put it over to one side as a safety-related defect.
Because of the specific conditions that arose and the manner in which the vehicle performed. I should mention that there has never been a reported case of a sticking pedal in Canada with that formulation of plastic. It relates to a high temperature, high humidity condition, and we haven't observed it here.
Well, in that same letter, you indicated, it was back in February 2008, that Toyota changed the material to which you made reference, used in the friction lever to a PPS in order to address the deficiency. Am I right?
That's correct.
But then you started to receive complaints in December of 2008, a few short months later, about pedals containing the new material. So you've already made an adjustment, you put in the new material, and you started to have problems anyway. Then in March of 2009, Toyota began the investigation in Europe that concluded that the material was susceptible to moisture, causing the pedal to stick. So Toyota changed the pedal design in order to address this particular defect. Was a notice of defect issued to Transport Canada then?
No.
Why not?
The pedals used in application in Europe at the time were considered to exhibit a problem that was predominantly in right-hand drive vehicles of a particular size of vehicle and in certain operational conditions.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. But in that same letter, you indicated that starting in October of 2009, Toyota began investigating in Canada and the U.S. reports of sticky pedals with the same friction lever, PPS, that Toyota investigated in Europe. Now, those reports would not have been a mystery to Toyota because they weren't a mystery to you. You made reference to them. When these reports came to Toyota's attention, was the notice of defect issued to Transport Canada?
Well, Mr. Volpe, let me just correct the preamble to the question. In fact, at that time, I didn't have knowledge of the earlier events with respect to any of the pedal investigations as they applied. When the issue first arose in Canada, and if memory serves me correctly, we had 5 FTRs issued before the recall on January 21st. The first of those incidents was something that we couldn't replicate or reproduce. So the first case where we could confirm that there was the sticking pedal condition arose at the end of November.
Move to Monsieur Laframboise.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for having come here today to appear before us. What interests me is to understand how this works. Now, Mr. Volpe mentioned this. There has to be a report on the defect. That's what the legislation obliges you to do. When you see that there's a defect, you have to advise Transport Canada. So now I understand that there are time frames. And my first question will be for Mr. Tanaka. First of all, is it you, Mr. Tanaka, that would receive the complaints or who supervised the analyses? How does it work when there is a complaint coming from Canada, the U.S., or Europe? Try to explain to me how that works.
ヒアリングして、部品を回収します。
Yes, let me answer. The complaints or claims from each region will be received by the dealer of that region, and the technician in the region will conduct the hearing, and the components will be recovered.
その部品は、カナダであれば、CQE の、LA またはシンシナティに送られて、その後日本の CQE、そして私の元に届きます。エンジニアの元に届きます。
And those components, if they were recovered in Canada, will be sent to CQE in LA or Cincinnati, and then will be sent to CQE in Japan, and engineers would take a look at them.
ご質問には、調べる方を今お話ししましたが、フィードバックというか戻す方でしょうか。
Are you asking about how we receive those components, or how we give feedback to each region?
Comment vous donnez une rétroaction?
How you give the feedback to each of the regions and the time frame within that which that would happen.
今申し上げましたように、各世界の地域の CQE から、日本の CQE、そして各エンジニアのもとですね。
あとどういうふうにフィードバックするのかってことです。
フィードバック。フィードバックにつきましては、設計で調べて、日本の、私どもは CQE に報告して、その後は CQE から展開するというふうで、その先は私の、範囲でございませんのでお答えできません。わかりません。
Now, as I mentioned earlier, the CQE of each region will send information to CQE in Japan, and engineers would take a look at the issue. And the design department, after investigation, will feed back the information to CQE in each region. And beyond that, it's not my responsibility, so I don't know.
Donc, qui prend la décision?
Therefore, who takes the decision to declare that it is a defect that affects safety? Is that each of the regions?
地域ではですね、当時は、日本でします。
No, that determination is not made at each region. At least at that time, the determination was made in Japan.
Donc,
Therefore, and what was the time frame? Because if you have to understand, Mr. Tanaka, that what's important to us is the time that it took. In Canada, we thought it took approximately 3 months before the decision was made. Earlier on, Mr. Beatty, you said that you have a new quality control structure. The problem really just turns around the time frame here. I know that most of your clients are satisfied. That's what the latest statistics show. But my problem is that it took too long. How can we shorten up that time frame so that the defect would be seen and that it wouldn't take 3 months? How can we change that so that it can take a shorter time? I mean, you're sending information to Japan, and then the dealers are involved. There's CQE here and in Japan. It just takes too much time. So do you have a new structure in place that is able to respond more rapidly?
Thank you. We have put in place both a new global quality and safety committee that is chaired by Mr. Akio Toyota, the president of our company. And with that, our regional safety and quality officers for each of the major areas of the world. North America has now a chief quality officer who's been appointed. There are working committees that support him, including Canadians on those committees, as well as an independent advisory committee with noted outside experts, including Roger Martin, a representative from Canada. So our vision of this is, of course, it takes a certain time for technical investigation and determination to be made. But we want to ensure that at all times, if there is any lack of clarity, if there's a sense that there is a lack of speed in dealing with issues or a lack of concern, that we have people from the region who are represented within that decision-making structure and are able to help influence the outcome. And that's a new program.
Parce que nous, en tant que décideurs, en tant qu'élus,
Because we, as decision makers and elected officials, because obviously we're talking about defects that you have to point out to Transport Canada, and our position would be that as soon as you have a complaint, you are obliged to send that information to Transport Canada. However, that would mean that Transport Canada has the ability to analyze all of these complaints, not just from Toyota, but from other companies as well. And of course, these machines are more and more sophisticated and complex. Do you think that if each of the complaints was filed immediately, do you think that it would be feasible for Transport Canada be able to deal with all of those complaints? Or do you think you can deal with them without having to address those complaints to Transport Canada?
Definition of a complaint. So, for example, anyone who brings his or her vehicle into a dealership may very well claim that in a particular driving condition they're feeling vibration or feedback in the steering wheel or whatever else. Those would be normal maintenance conditions, but they're all represented in our database as being, a case or a statement by the consumer about the vehicle. We need to be able to understand what are routine issues that are just matters of maintenance or wear and tear versus something that is significant and a safety issue. So it's a definition that we need to work on.
Merci, Monsieur Laforvoise. Mr. Bevington?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you to the witnesses for appearing here today on this particular issue. Just to understand better the relationship in North America of Toyota Canada, how is the ownership structured in your?
Toyota Canada operates as an independent distributor. We're a 50-50 joint venture between Toyota Motor Corporation and Mitsui. And just for your background, Toyota Canada began as a company called Canadian Motor Industries. We were a multi-brand distributor that was set up as a Canadian company. We've evolved over time to solely represent Toyota.
In your manufacturing process in Canada, much of it is for the joint market of North America. How many vehicles are we seeing deployed in Canada from your plants, and how many are deployed in the United States?
So I don't represent the the manufacturing arm of the company. That's a separate entity. But if memory serves me correctly, current annual production somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 vehicles, and in terms of product that would stay here in Canada, last year about 100,000 of the vehicles that we sold were built here in Canada. So roughly a quarter in any given year would stay here in Canada.
And of the total sales in Canada?
Just over half of our total sales were Canadian-made last year.
Okay. Now, we've heard talk of changes in U.S. regulation for vehicles. Will that impact on Canadian production?
Absolutely. No matter what sort of regulation is implemented in the United States, because we share a common marketplace with vehicles moving back and forth between the two markets, U.S. regulatory changes will have an impact on the vehicles driven on Canadian roads.
Are there many differences now that exist between Canadian regulations and U.S. regulations?
There are some, and there's some specific unique Canadian safety regulations with respect to daytime running lamps, immobilizers, some other specific equipment. But in general, I think the government has committed itself to moving toward harmonization of regulations with the Americans.
When you how do you see the issue in terms of Canadian customers versus U.S. customers when it comes to dealing with defects?
I think that there is seldom any lag in either direction across the border in terms of recall activity. So whether it's a recall initiated by us in Canada that affects U.S. product, or whether it's a U.S. recall affecting our product, we move together to make sure that recalls are conducted. We have systems in place that allow us to undertake recall activity on each other's products in the event that those vehicles are in the other's marketplace. And I would say, from the standpoint specifically of our dealer network, my impression of our dealers has been that they've always gone above and beyond to provide extra levels of service to our customers when there's a recall situation. And we recognize it's very disruptive to our customers. So they put on the extra hours, they do the extra work to make sure that people are taken care of.
Are you in a position to compare the relative services of Transport Canada with the U.S. Equivalent in terms of their abilities, their substantial investment in vehicle safety? Can you give me an idea of how you see that?
I don't. Obviously, I don't deal with NHTSA on a day-to-day basis, so I can't speak to the nature of their operations. What I can tell you is that my impression from any of my dealings with the Transport Canada officials is that they are knowledgeable and very diligent. There are some things that I think we do very well here in Canada, and I would say that as a distributor, let alone as in reference to the work of the regulators. We are experts in matters related to cold weather operation of vehicles, and so we have engineering teams that are specifically dedicated to that work, because we know these are issues which arise in Canada in these conditions. And I would say the same is true for Transport Canada. It has its areas of strength relative to the U.S.
Well, we've seen the complexity of Transport Canada's work vis-a-vis vehicle issues. We've seen some of the statistics there. Would you say that Transport Canada has the resources to deal with the ever complex automotive market, with the greater number of brands, the type of changing technology? Do you feel that we're adequate in that regard?
Well, even from the standpoint of an automotive distributor supporting our dealer network, obviously those technologies change all the time, and we have to regularly retrain our personnel to be able to support those vehicles. That having been said, one of the things that is happening is that, given the rise of electronics in vehicles, many of the systems are actually easier to check with various available tools. So as the nature of those systems change and the technical challenges change, so too does the standard knowledge, and some of the old issues tend to go away. So, for example, I think the last time I was here, I mentioned that in the past, one of the things that was common across the auto industry was to experience binding of throttle cables. Because those cables don't exist anymore, that's an issue that has gone away as we've moved to new technology. So I think everyone in the industry is learning and changing their skill set and the tools that we use to look at it. I've heard the department say that they're of the view that they have the resources that are necessary to the job. Clearly, if the job changes, that's a separate question.
Thank you, Mr. Bevington. Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chair, good morning and welcome back to our committee. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to say thank you, first of all, for the considerable amount of material that you have provided the committee. It's made for a lot of reading, but thank you very much. Mr. Beattie, I think that what's apparent here is that our committee really is trying to figure out who knew what, when, where, why, and on a go-forward basis, how do we resolve this? So I'll get to that last question at the end. But I guess in some of the documentation that you had provided to us, there were questions asked previously about isolated reports of incidents, you say, in the U.S. in July of 06 and in Estonia of August 07. You talked in response to another question, Toyota had identified 39 reports related to the sticky pedal phenomena, which were issued in Europe. Can you tell us, you've described the organizational structure in Canada. Can you tell us about the organizational structure in Europe? Is there any communication between the two? Would they share any of that information?
Well, I would, I'm not intimately familiar with Europe. Obviously, that's not part of my day-to-day role. But I can say in general that the organization in Europe is that you have many distributors operating at the local level on a national basis across Europe. There is a regional organization called Toyota Motor Europe that is responsible for the activities within the region, and then, like Canada, technical matters would go back to CQE in Japan for ultimate investigation and review. And obviously, as we talk about that type of engineering happens at various different points. First, in the design of the vehicle. In other words, have we considered the issues and have we designed to a specific performance parameter? Then, how does the vehicle perform in operation in the field? And also the quality checks that you do at manufacturing. So there are a number of different points where you intervene to deal with those issues. But in general, the same process would apply in Europe as it does in Canada, which is it starts with a vehicle identified at the dealership, and it escalates as the various parties are either able to resolve or are looking for additional technical support. And
that information would be shared with whom? Would it go back to Japan? Would Japan share that information with its North American counterparts?
It would go back to Japan, and we would expect that where the information was relevant to product that we put into the Canadian marketplace, that would be shared with us.
So on a go-forward basis, what you've said is that you've established a new global safety quality committee. Could you describe to the committee what that looks like? What is its function? To whom does it report? And how will that, on a future basis, try and mitigate these problems that we've seen?
Right. So I think as we reported at the last committee meeting, it was the intention of the company to establish a global committee chaired by Akio Toyoda, our president. That's been done. It's comprised of regional chief quality officers, and a chief quality officer has been appointed for North America. Below the chief quality officer is a North American task force that's responsible for looking at all issues of quality and safety, and that meets on a regular basis to review issues and report them up through the chief quality officer. In addition to that, in North America, we have an independent safety advisory committee that is looking at all of these issues and providing independent advice to the company to make sure that there's nothing that we're overlooking because of because of process inside the company or our approach to doing business. The objective here is to ensure that we have the most information flow possible inside the company, so that if there is something that appears to be significant, that it will be identified and shared.
And what would trigger a report to the investigation officer?
Well, so for our chief quality officer, anything that may be coming from the field or that is identified in manufacturing or is generally captured by our operations across North America. So that would include Toyota Canada, but it would include the manufacturing facilities, our counterpart distributor in the United States, Toyota Motor Sales, and so forth.
And will that initiate an alert to all dealerships?
Well, what it's intended to do is to make sure that if there is any if there's any delay or if there hasn't been adequate consideration of some information that's undertaken, and then the normal process of identification of the problem would be triggered. It would come back as it does today through to Toyota Canada, and we would take one of several steps. If it was a safety defect, obviously we would trigger a notice of defect and recall. If it's simply a question of the functioning of a part, then it might be a technical service bulletin or some other information to the dealers about how to deal with with a specific issue in the vehicle. But the idea is, again, get the maximum communication flow, ensure that nothing gets stuck anywhere in the system, and hopefully that translates into increased speed to market.
How many incidents or how many reports would it take from a dealership or from a variety of dealerships before it would raise a red flag to this quality control?
Again, I think that depends on the nature, quality of the information that's coming in from the field. Depending on how well documented the report is in the first place, you may or may not be able to actually replicate the condition that's being referred to, and that's one of the issues in the early stages of this campaign, was that it was very difficult to replicate the condition. And in other cases, you may have something that's very clear and you can work with immediately, and we have some recent examples of that as well.
Would you be able to take into consideration, you spoke earlier about humidity being a problem in some areas. Would you be able to take into consideration the different geographical areas that you're dealing with and be able to share that information back and forth?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons for putting in that role of the chief quality officer on a regional basis, is to make sure that those things which are characteristic or perhaps unique to a given region are being addressed. It's also why, as I explained at our last appearance, we put an engineering team on the ground in Canada during the winter months to look precisely at those conditions which are unique to the Canadian marketplace, because Arizona doesn't give me meaningful data in December against a Canadian driving situation. And so we need to have people close to the scene to be able to understand what's happening.
Thank you, Mr. Volpe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to pick up where I left off, Mr. Beatty, and I'm a little disturbed by some of the things that you've said to my other colleagues as we've been going along, because it strikes me that you have been making some qualitative decisions as you've been going along about the material that's come to you. You've made a decision about whether some things are routine or maintenance issues, and you knew what was going on. In fact, when I spoke to you a moment or two ago, I asked you, when those reports regarding the sticky pedals and the composition of the products that went from to PPS, did you advise Transport Canada? And you didn't get a chance to answer, so I'm going to ask you again. Did you advise Transport Canada of the notice of defect?
So just to be clear, are we talking about the Tundra pedal?
Right.
Right. No. Not at that time. We included it in our January 21st recall in order to ensure that anyone who was experiencing a condition that they might feel was related to the sticky pedal was covered by the same campaign.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You put that in your letter again, the letter of February 19th, and it strikes me that you're trying to cover your tracks. Because on January 21st, you issued that notice of defect to Transport Canada dealing with the pedals, both the PA46 and PPS materials. And, oddly, and this is what is disturbing, in committee testimony on the 16th of March, you stated, and I quote you, "Our first case of the sticky pedal was in late October 2009, and at the time we didn't know what it was." End of quote. You can imagine I would be shocked that you would say you didn't know what it was. So for 3 years, according to your letter, Toyota is dealing with this issue, and you didn't know what it was. But you also indicate in the testimony that it's your responsibility, yours, to issue a recall notice the moment you became aware of a defect. Mr. Beatty, I don't understand. It would have taken you 3 years when at the beginning of my questioning I asked you whether you were aware of Section 10 of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, which holds the company that manufactures, sells, or imports any vehicles and so on responsible. Why would it have taken you 3 years?
So, Mr. Chairman, if we can back up the chronology for a moment, I think there are two issues here. One is the question of how are safety determinations made and on what basis. The other one is with respect to the knowledge of Toyota Canada with respect to issues affecting vehicles in the Canadian marketplace. In respect to the first issue, there is a specific process that is followed with respect to the determination of those issues, and ultimately it comes to a conclusion as to whether or not a safety defect exists. At that moment, I have absolutely the obligation to ensure that we take action if that determination has been made.
No, really, with respect, Mr. Beatty, it talks about when you become aware, when the company becomes aware. So there are two issues, to put that back to you. Mm-hmm. It's one, whether you're complying with the guidelines and the Act as per Transport Canada's observance of the Act. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of leadership, whether Transport Canada is yours, or the other, whether Toyota, essentially, the one that's responsible for the engineering and the design, is giving you the information about the vehicles that you're selling in the North American market. That's what it's about. Right. And you're telling me, no, on both counts, you became aware of it on January 20th, because the 21st is when you issued the recall.
Well, that's right, because that's the time when a determination was made that the safety defect existed.
That's a little too legalistic. When a determination was made, the Act says when you become aware. Right. And you became aware of that 3 years earlier.
No, you become aware of it as a result of a process of scientific investigation into the issue and the determination that this condition exists and should be
with all due respect, you referred to Arizona, and Arizona's conditions are a lot better than the ones that you act for here. And if there was a problem in Arizona, you should have expected a problem here in Canada. You're asking this committee to think that climatic conditions in Canada are better than the ones in Arizona, and therefore you are going to make a determination. The word determination about whether there is a safety defect is contingent upon your scientific study when your head office is already conducting such engineering studies worldwide?
I'm sorry, you've lost me completely on
I was afraid I would have. You lost me a little while ago when you were talking about becoming aware.
I'm going to have to go to Monsieur Carrier. Welcome.
Merci. Bonjour.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. This is an unusual appearance for me here at this committee, but it is a very interesting subject. Mr. Chairman, we heard that representatives from the Department of Transport could answer our questions. Could we bring someone forward?
Donald. Gerard McDonald, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of Safety and Security. He's been with us before. And Mr. Carrier has...
Donald? McDonald.
McDonald, I'm sorry. Yes.
Monsieur McDonald?
Mr. McDonald. Just a moment, please. So is my 5 minutes starting just now? Thank you. I had some questions I wanted to ask that go back to the beginning of these difficulties with Toyota products. Did you receive additional information that meets with the questions you had? Did you have good cooperation concerning this information, and did you have enough information from them?
This information came to light. We have had numerous meetings with Toyota. Obviously, we've been following all deliberations quite closely, both those here and in the U.S. As a result of certain statements made by NHTSA, by Toyota in the U.S., and by Toyota here, we have asked both Toyota Canada and Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada for additional data and information on what they knew and when. I'm pleased to say that both entities have been quite cooperative with us. We have received over 9,000 pages of documentation from these two companies that we have, for the most part, analyzed and reviewed. And that is essentially where we're at this point.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, with the supplementary information that you have to study the problem, you can see that we are still reacting. We're still looking at the feedback to this problem. And many of our constituents want to know that we're dealing with problems once they've happened. So following the study of these difficulties, have you formulated any recommendations or come to any decisions regarding improvements to your process in order to avoid that this situation not happen again? We talk a lot about Toyota currently, but in a world of globalization that we live in today, it's not unusual to deal with many different businesses, and often the headquarters of these corporations are abroad. So it's important for us to have a government that is working through these departments and to ensure that people's safety and security is ensured. So have you drawn any conclusions about good recommendations that you might make concerning your operations in future?
We're looking at how this situation has evolved. We are obviously monitoring closely the deliberations of this committee, and our minister has stated that we would seriously consider any recommendations put forth by this committee, how to improve the Motor Vehicle Safety Act in light of what has transpired with this particular instance. We're also looking at Minister Volpe's Pedal Act that he has tabled in the House, as to how that might help us deliver on our mandate, and we're undertaking as well a review of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act to determine whether or not any changes are needed to improve the safety of motor vehicles in Canada.
Est-ce que dans vos modifications que vous entrevoyez, est-ce que
in the changes that you intend to make, do you think indeed that you should be better informed or sooner on all of the complaints that are made by the vehicle owners and users of these vehicles, rather than waiting until a decision's been made by each individual business as to whether or not it really is a design problem that must be corrected? Do you want to be proactive and be able to better analyze the complaints that are sent in yourselves, rather than just reacting to them, so that you could at least study them yourselves and decide according to statistics on probability whether or not there is a problem, and not simply waiting for a reaction from each of these businesses?
Chair, that currently we do react to any of the complaints we receive now from the Canadian public. As we testified earlier to the committee, we receive about 1,200 complaints a year with respect to motor vehicle issues, and we investigate each of those complaints. Certainly, the more information you have, the better determination you can make. It's a question of capability of dealing with, if we were to go to a system where all complaints must be reported to Transport Canada, that would obviously increase greatly the number of issues we would have to deal with, and there would be a resource consideration as to how to deal with that information. I would note that in the United States they do have a system where all of these complaints must be brought forward, and in that particular instance, it seems that NHTSA was no better in determining this particular problem than we were.
Merci, Monsieur Carrier.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for returning to committee. Of course, you were here a few months ago. We now, since that time, or at that time, we were able to establish that Toyota in Canada, or knew about its problem in Canada with the CTS gas pedal before issuing a recall. Transport Canada officials are now investigating possible violation of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act. Mr. Beatty, I was sort of taken by your response to a question from Mr. Laframboise. You had said it depends on what the definition of complaint is. And I don't know about you, but I was reminded of former President Clinton when they got to the most incriminating question, and he said, well, it all depends on what the definition of is. And I'm not taking a lot of comfort here. There's a bit of hair splitting going on, and I think what I see in the emails that have been provided to us is a pattern of doing the minimum with respect to safety recalls. Now, the Prius braking system problem. In a February 4th, 2010 email, you asked what Transport Canada's expectation was from Toyota Canada, as if the issuance of a recall relies on Transport Canada rather than Toyota Canada. In the 2009 Matrix rear seat cushion problem, Transport Canada officials raised the question on whether there's impact on a child's safety seat. You say, well, isn't that a quality issue rather than a safety issue? In a November 27, 2009 email from someone at Toyota, I don't know, you guys block out who's responsible for sending these, you actually stated that you wanted a Transport Canada investigation on the 2009 Benza issue, not to be conducted at a dealership, but to be done at your head office, given the high profile of this investigation. Maybe it all depends on what the definition of safety is at Toyota. I'm a little concerned. Let me ask a question of you. Moving to an issue here, technical service bulletins or dealer service bulletins, you raised that issue. What is the difference between issuing one of those, technical service bulletin, versus issuing a notice of defect for recall? What determination does Toyota make in the difference between those? It really does depend on what the definition of safety is. Mr. Beatty, what's the difference?
Right. So, thank you. I guess the point that I was trying to make earlier, and if I didn't, let me go back and just clarify the record. If I look, for example, at the contacts that we have in simply to our Customer Interaction Center in the first part of this year, through January through April, there are over 50,000 of those. Each and every one of those opens up as a case, but in some cases there's simply a request for a brochure, not anything to do with anything else. So what I'm saying with respect to what's the definition of a complaint, anyone walking...
I'm not asking that. I'm asking what the definition is, or what the difference is in determination between issuing a technical service bulletin or issuing a notice of defect.
Right.
I'm not asking you what a complaint is,
but
Mr. Beatty.
we began with the issue of a complaint, and I just wanted to be clear that in our view...
I'd like my question answered, not Mr. Laframboise's, please.
Yes, and hopefully I can do both.
I'd like you to answer mine.
The issue with respect to safety, I think, is pretty clearly spelled out with respect to the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, and I believe that the Deputy Minister, for example, has expressed in writing the government's understanding of that definition. The point is that we may very well issue technical service bulletins that have nothing at all to do with a safety feature of the vehicle. They relate to to any number of aspects of the servicing of a car.
Has a Toyota technical service bulletin ever later become an issue under a safety recall?
It's possible that as additional data becomes available, that a determination is made that in fact it's a safety issue rather than a routine service.
Like in the United States, technical service bulletins filed with NHTSA in 2008 and 9 with respect to the floor mats later became the same models under consideration for recall. The advantage, of course, to issuing a dealer service bulletin is, of course, it shifts the cost to the consumer rather than to Toyota Canada for doing the repair. But, you know, I guess the question I really want to ask is well, you've confirmed that some of them may have become safety recalls later. has Toyota ever used the dealer service bulletin to delay reporting serious safety defects from Transport Canada?
I'm not aware of any such thing ever happening.
Aware of anything? Are you aware of any of your suppliers in Canada?
I have to.
Oh, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Crombie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beattie, in sworn testimony before this committee on March 16, 2010, Mr. Ray Tanguay, president of the Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada Incorporated, said that he stated that prior to issuing the recall on the defective accelerator pedals on January 21, 2010, Toyota was working with the pedal manufacturer CTS to redesign that pedal. Do you recall that statement?
Yes.
Okay. And he couldn't recall the exact date that he became aware of the defect in the pedal design. But he did say it was around the end of the year. Well, clearly around the end of the year isn't January 21st, 2010. So, as the person responsible for operations at Toyota Canada, were you surprised to hear the admission by Mr. Tanguay?
No, I think that when you look at the operations of a manufacturing company, what happens at the level of that manufacturing plant is that they will be notified of a pending change of production. That's their role, is to assemble vehicles. The other engineering issues are dealt with elsewhere.
And as the person responsible for operations at Toyota Canada, you have to take responsibility for the engineering design and the specs that you provide to and that are manufactured by your contractors, such as CTS. Correct?
The Toyota Motor Corporation does, yes.
Thank you. Now, are you familiar with a press release issued by the U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood on Monday, April 5th, 2010, titled Secretary LaHood announces Department of Transport seeking maximum civil penalty from Toyota?
Yes, in general.
In that press release, it states that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that's learned through documents obtained from Toyota, that the company knew of the sticky pedal defect since at least September 29, 2009. And that day, Toyota issued repair procedures to their distributors in 31 countries, 31 European countries, as well as Canada, to address complaints of sticky accelerator pedals and sudden increases in engine RPM and sudden vehicle acceleration. The documents also show that Toyota was aware that consumers in the United States were experiencing the same problems. You are aware that the U.S. government fined Toyota a record of almost $0.4 million for failing to give notice of the defect. Will you also be aware, are you also aware that Toyota paid that fine rather than contest it, and why?
Yes, although Toyota in the United States indicated that it did not believe that it was in violation of legislation. Beyond that, I'm afraid I can't tell you very much. I'm not familiar with the provisions of the U.S. law. The one thing I would like to point out, however, is that Secretary LaHood's press release was wrong. It made reference to the TI having been received in Canada. That was never the case. And we pointed that out in a subsequent message to Mr. LaHood. But I don't know how to explain that other than to say that sometimes when information crosses borders, wrong material crops up. And in this case, the reference to Canada having received the TI was simply incorrect.
But you do have a system in place to do that, haven't you?
Well, I wouldn't ordinarily receive a technical information directed at European distributors.
I think there's an overwhelming amount of evidence here, which I'll remind you, was based in documents that were sent to Canada. So how can you say that Toyota did not break the law here? There's evidence that proves that Toyota knew at least 3 months ahead before you issued a recall. Why didn't you come to the minister with that information? And why the cover-up?
Well, one, there was no cover-up. Two, as I just mentioned, with respect to the reference to TI, that wasn't received in Canada. With respect to the cases, the first case that we had was the subject of a field technical report in October, but we couldn't replicate the condition. We didn't know what it was as Toyota Canada. That material was provided to engineering for review. The first case that we had that we could replicate, in other words, that we could confirm that something was happening, was in late November, and I think we moved as diligently as we possibly could to identify those issues and move to recall.
Thank you. Just quickly to Mr. Gerard, of the 9,000 pages of documentation that Toyota Canada finally provided, is there any new information, anything relevant that you've gleaned? And I'd like to know also from Mr. Beattie, why did it take so long, and why wasn't that information provided to Transport Canada sooner, and why wasn't it presented to the committee as well in a more timely way?
Certainly to date, we have not found anything new with respect to the sticky accelerator issue. But as I indicated earlier, we're still analyzing some of those documents, and we expect to be receiving some further documentation as well.
Thank you. Mr. Jean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming today and providing follow-up information. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of information. I received in my office yesterday 3 CDs. Took 20 minutes, actually, to open up the CDs just to get at the documents, some 58 documents, I understand. 221 pages in total. So I quite frankly, will be reserving my opportunity to call you back as witnesses to answer questions from those documents. I did receive a letter originally from Toyota Canada in relation to a request I made for pedals. In particular, at a committee meeting, I asked whether or not the defects that we're talking about in Canada, the pedal assembly and the material utilized, was the same as was found to be defective in Europe. And the answer to that in the first letter was, quite frankly, a wiggle letter, we call them in law. It didn't answer my question, and I was very disappointed with that, and I wanted to put that on the record of how disappointed I was by that answer by Toyota Canada. Certainly in the response that I received just recently, May 31st, 2010, a letter from Toyota Canada answering those questions in more detail and, quite frankly, what I would have expected from a professional organization in the first place, which indicated that the material, in essence, utilized in Canada that resulted in sticky pedal phenomenon was the same used in Ireland and the United Kingdom. Now, I understand you have indicated that you feel that everything was done, in particular in relation to notice period. I would argue that point. I do not believe adequate notice was given from me personally. In this particular case, you had notice a year before, and I'd like to talk about that first. What recall mechanisms, professional notices, technical service bulletins, etc., would have exchanged hands between Toyota Europe and Toyota Canada or Toyota United States? Because in essence, Toyota International, I suppose I could utilize, owns a percentage of everything. In fact, owns Toyota Europe and Toyota US and owns 50% of Toyota Canada. So what was exchanged between Toyota Europe and Toyota Canada or other branches in Toyota? Because certainly I would suggest that you should have notice of that.
Right. So I can't speak to what may have been transmitted between Europe and any other part of the world. With respect to Europe and Canada, there was no direct communication on this issue, and I might say that it was, as Toyota Europe was looking at it, they were looking specifically at 2 models, the iGo and the Yaris. Now, while Yaris is sold here, it's sold with a different design of pedal by different manufacturers, so it's not covered by it all. The iGo is not sold outside of Europe. So. But
I understand the pedal assembly is made of the same manufactured polymer, is it not? And in fact, the same assembly, except one is right-hand, one is left-hand.
Allow me just to break out the question so that we can be clear about this. As a general rule, ultimately, all of the pedals that were recalled use the same polymer and are the same general design. The vehicles that were being reviewed in the European piece were not the same.
I understand, but the same design, general design, same material. To me, bingo, bing, 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 bells go off. We've got a problem. A year later, you give notice to the regulator in Canada that there may be a problem with it after
an additional 3 months of confirmation. Now, Mr. Beattie, I'm not satisfied with that. We'll see whether or not the regulator is satisfied with it. You have a mother?
Absolutely.
As we all do. My mother taught me how to drive some 30 years ago. Today, she's not quite what she was 30 years ago when she taught me how to drive. 68 years old, and her ability to react is not quite what mine was or what hers was 30 years ago. And she does not drive a Toyota, but I will tell you this. If I found out she was driving for 3 months with equipment which would be only way be described as malfunctioning or a possibility of malfunctioning, I would be very, very upset. And I've heard from many Canadians that they are very, very upset. So I hope Toyota takes that to heart and does something differently. And speaking of which, what could we do differently as a committee here today? What could we do differently in the future to make sure that the notice period is shrunk considerably?
Well, it comes down, I think, on both the part of companies and on the part of the government to put as many technical resources as we can on the identification of those problems and determining whether or not a safety defect actually exists.
Mr. Beattie, what I'm going to ask for you to do, because I'm limited in my questions, I would ask that you provide to us, through the committee, some suggestions that you may have in relation to regulation, legislation, and how we could shorten that notice period, because it's quite frankly not adequate. But I do have one final question, and that is, on your document dated May 31st, 2010, you have at the top of it, privileged and confidential attorney work product. Does this mean that you're trying to provide to us documents that are protected by solicitor-client privilege?
Obviously, when we provide it to you, we've waived that.
All right. Well, you do have that in the top corner. I'm just curious. This document was provided for us, and it's in there. I'm just curious. What is the intention of that?
No, it's in its drafting stages. It is what it is, which is.
It's not a draft though, right now.
No.
What's the intention of that in the top left corner?
There's none at this point. It's waived.
Thank you, Mr. Volpe. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much again. I'd like to come back to this issue about responsibility, because it seems to me, Mr. Beattie, that Toyota Canada has shirked the responsibility of showing some leadership and providing a service to its consumers, as per Mr. Jean's example of his mom. And I'm wondering whether you compromised the ability of Transport Canada to provide the regulatory responsibility as well. And I'll ask Mr. MacDonald that in a moment too. But you came before this committee on the 16th of March, and in the process of explaining in your testimony the recall process, you took credit for, to use your words, providing a unique Canadian safety recall on all-weather floor mats and the newly introduced Toyota Venza. Do you recall when that recall was issued?
Absolutely.
And it was?
It was issued. It was notified to Transport Canada on the 26th of November.
But you indicated that when you initiated this that you were taking this great responsibility, but emails that were provided to the committee, and by the way, I share Mr. Jean's views that we didn't get all the information we asked for. They showed that on October the 2nd, the head of recalls at Transport Canada, Mr. Nigel Mortimer, wrote to Toyota expressing concern that the Venza model was not included in that September recall. That's October the 2nd. And he stated that Transport Canada had 2 cases involving the Venzas, and he demanded that Toyota address these concerns immediately. So here's what happened. And you've documented everything in your letter. On October the 7th, Toyota issued further recalls, but not for the Venza. Mr. Mortimer wrote to Toyota again, and he said, "We remain concerned that your current exclusion of the Venza and trust that this will be included in the near future." A month later, Transport Canada sent another letter to Toyota asking again that the Venza be included in the recall. 5 weeks later, that's after November, in fact, December 17th, a full 11 weeks after being asked to address these concerns immediately, Toyota issued a recall. I'm just wondering if I should be left with the impression, or the question is, if this is how Toyota always operates, even when under scrutiny?
So let's go back to that chronology for a second. At the beginning of October, both Toyota and Transport Canada we're looking at certain field reports and trying to make some determination as to what was happening in respect of Venza. The first cases that we had, including the Transport Canada cases, indicated stacking of aftermarket, in other words, non-Toyota floor mats interfering with pedals in the cars. We were trying to understand what that meant in the connection with the other broader issue of the U.S. all-weather floor mat case that was going on. We combined the work on the review of all of our floor mats. That's why on November 25th in our meeting with Transport, we reported on all of the mats together. And
Mr. Beatty, I'm sorry, but
issued the statement the following day.
Yeah, no, but that just isn't good enough. We read through those emails, some of the reports by your field investigators and Transport Canada's field investigators, and they dismissed that as just a lot of crock. That's all it is. In fact, some of those emails, if they're read out publicly, would embarrass anybody, would embarrass everybody. But the issue is not so much that you had to wait for this or for that. It's that you took 11 weeks after Transport Canada, the regulator, demanded that you act. 11 weeks. They had information, and you wouldn't act on it. It boggles the mind that Transport Canada didn't immediately act the way the minister said he would, i.e. launch investigations, and yet you admit that you knew all of these things and you wouldn't do anything about it for 11 weeks. That's 3 months of people driving under dangerous conditions. How can you look at yourself in the mirror and say, it's okay for me to let people drive with a defective vehicle for 3 months while I make up my mind that this isn't a routine or maintenance procedure and that in fact it is a safety-related defect? And there he is, right there, Mr. McDonald from Transport Canada is telling you, wake up.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think if you were to review those documents, you'd also notice that the documents explicitly state that there wasn't a defect in the vehicle. What there was one set of rubber floor mats in Venza that were out of specification, which we were able to determine, and we took action about that. We did that in the period from the beginning of October to our meeting with Transport Canada in November.
Don't insist, Mr. Beatty. Your field investigators in the United States and in Canada, transported field investigators in the United States and in Canada, were saying this is a crock. In fact, in one field investigator, whose name is wiped out, said, here I am, this height, this weight, this size, I've got both of my feet on a brake, and I can't do this. It's got nothing to do with floor mats. It's got everything to do with shirking responsibility. It's got everything to do with avoiding your own leadership on your products.
Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Mr. Laformoise.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be for Mr. Tanaka. Earlier on, you mentioned that the decision had been taken by Japan concerning the recall for the accelerator pedals. You saw there was a defect, you determined that, and it was decided in Japan. Your research center is there. So the decision was made in Japan, but where was the research done? Because there were complaints coming from Canada, from the United States, from Europe, etc. So you looked at this all together, and was the detailed analysis done in Japan?
Yes, in Japan.
Okay.
And your research facilities are in Japan, or the most important one is in Japan?
Donc, Monsieur MacDonald.
So, Mr. MacDonald, when we look at this, indeed there have been a series of complaints. There were complaints from Canada, the U.S., and Europe, and it seems rather complex, because I'm always coming back to the point of how we can ensure that this will not happen again. My colleague, Mr. Carrier, said earlier that we might have to rethink some of the ways of doing. So now You're seeing what's happening. The law, the legislation obliges you to deal with defects that are identified. Most of the complaints are received by the dealers and sent on to the company, so they're obliged to send you that information when they've made those determinations and then deal with the follow-up. But we can see that with the accelerator pedal, it's complex. These are new technologies, so do you have all of the necessary technologies? If we were to decide that all complaints should be referred to Transport Canada and then sent in turn to the headquarters of, say, Toyota in Japan, do we have the technology to do that? Is it too complex? Try to explain to me how that might work.
Complex system. You have to understand that we're dealing with somewhere in the order of 5,000 vehicle manufacturers and importers in Canada. So to think that Transport Canada would have complete oversight over every aspect of every vehicle brought into this country is probably not realistic. So we have to work definitely in concert with the manufacturers, the importers, and the distributors to work together to try and find any safety defects that may exist. Are there different ways to do it? Is there a greater amount of oversight that the federal government should have? I think these are all considerations that we may want to look at. But obviously this would not be without certain resource implications depending on what level of intervention we would like the federal government to have.
Parce que ce que vous avez dit tantôt, c'est que...
Because what you said earlier is that in the United States, there is a duty to follow up on the complaints with the transport authorities in the States, but despite that, they weren't able to determine all of this. Is that what you said earlier?
In the United States, they have an act. It's called the TRAN Act, I believe. And what that requires is manufacturers to report defects to NHTSA, whether they occur in the States or anywhere else in the world. That's a provision we do not have in our law. They've had that provision for some time. As I understand it, one of the problems NHTSA has is they have more information than they can realistically analyze and deal with. Whether or not they had any particular information about the accelerator, the sticky accelerator in Toyota, I really can't comment on that. But obviously they do receive a lot more information than we would, and their concern is how do they deal with all that information.
Parfait. Et Monsieur Beatty.
Thank you. And Mr. Beatty, the new structure that Toyota has now set up, which you call the improved quality structure, you've no doubt understood that we feel that the time frames, the delays are too long, and now I have to count on your company and its quality control mechanism. So do you think when it's as complex as it is, and we can see that the accelerator problem required further research in Japan at the center, as Mr. Tanaka said, that's where it was realized that there was indeed a defect. Do you think your new structure will allow you to be more efficient and effective?
We're undertaking these improvements, and we've asked for outside experts to provide us with advice too about how we can make further improvements to what we do. So we're trying to leave nothing about our current process unchallenged inside the company, to look at it and to make determinations about how to proceed. You know, again, as I've said, technical issues are complex. They take some time to resolve. But for the sake of our own customers, we want to make sure that people have confidence in their vehicles. So we need as much as legislators do to ensure that that information is coming forward, that action's being taken, and that our customers can be confident.
Parce que est-ce que vous avez un centre de recherche, vous?
Do you have a research center here in Canada that is as effective as the one in Japan?
Research activities here in Canada. We have a cold research center in Timmins, Ontario. We have engineering teams on the ground for winter field inspection purposes. There is a technical center for North America in Michigan. and Canadians work at that center as well. So there's a growing technical presence here in North America.
Sauf que
Mr. Bevington?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in seeing how moving forward we can make a difference here, and perhaps if you just kind of clarify for us how you see Toyota Canada will act in the future on defects identification in a very clear fashion. I'd like to hear that from you.
Right. Well, thank you. There are a number of things, as I said at the last committee hearing, that Toyota Canada actually has been leading in and has contributed back to the global Toyota organization, but including our early detection, early response activities, all data on service operations at the dealership level are shared with Toyota Canada. We run computer algorithms to look for anything that's unusual in service activity that would give us a hint that there might be a technical problem, whether it's a safety-related defect or something else. But above and beyond that, clearly we've been increasing staff. We have been taking up our role with respect to the task force committees and to ensure that we're part of this North American regional activity as well as our pre-existing relationship with Japan. And I think the more that you can have technical and engineering staff speaking to each other on a wide range of issues, the faster this information is going to come to the fore. In addition to that, as we undertook, we have provided to Transport Canada EDR readout tools. So there are now 4 sets of EDR readout tools in the possession of Transport Canada, which again we hope will make it easier for the regulator in this case to understand the data that's coming out of our cars. And this is, in many respects, as Mr. McDonald's already acknowledged, an iterative approach. There are some things that the regulator will raise with us. There's some things we'll raise with the regulator. But in both cases, we will undertake to act as quickly as humanly possible to deal with any issues that arise.
And you, Mr. McDonald, in what you've heard from Toyota and with your relationship with Toyota, how would you describe it in comparison to other car companies in Canada when it comes to these particular issues?
I think we have a relationship with Toyota is similar to that with other manufacturers in the country. I think there's a certain amount of whenever a safety-related defect is either found by us or brought to our attention, there is always a certain amount of give and take. We would always like action sooner rather than later, but it is an iterative process.
Well, you say there's 5,000 companies involved in this pursuit of car excellence. Mm-hmm. How within your department, how do you handle the actual analysis and ensuring that each or even the major companies are all using best practices in this regard? Do you have a process by which you analyze what's coming back from these companies? Do you have a process that allows you to identify that a particular company is acting correctly within what you consider best practices?
I'm assuming you're talking about best practices with respect to the notification of safety defects. And essentially the way
the provision of information and the incident reports and all of those things that make up the relationship that you have to have with these manufacturers.
Fair enough. We deal with it in a two-pronged way, essentially. As you're aware, there are certain complaints that are brought to our attention, and we deal with those ourselves. We'll analyze each of those complaints, make a determination about what it may involve, and whether or not there's a safety issue that we should be following up on. We also hold meetings with the major manufacturers and their associations on a regular basis. to become aware of any issues that they may be dealing with. And they will also initiate meetings at their own behest as well if they are aware of a particular issue that we may not be aware of. That would usually start the process of deliberation on whether or not what we're talking about is a safety-related defect and how we're dealing with it.
So among all these manufacturers, you don't have best practices code that you can apply to them? I mean, sure, with the major manufacturers, you probably have an established relationship that you can identify over a course of time that's proceeding in a fashion that you're comfortable with, or that you expect the expectations there. But what about all the new companies that are coming on stream that bringing cars into Canada? How do you deal with that? You haven't seen an increase in your staff to work with that. How is this happening?
No. As I said, we don't have any a particular code of best practices per se. The manufacturers, importers, and distributors are guided by the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, and it's their obligation, if they become aware of a safety-related defect, to advise us of such.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, Toyota Europe wouldn't have shared the sticky pedal report with Toyota Canada because, like Toyota Canada, it's a sales and marketing wing of the company in Japan. There's also a manufacturing wing in each of these countries, Canada, U.S., Europe as well, but it's Toyota Japan that's the nerve center, if you will, that makes the decisions. Did they share that report ultimately with Toyota Canada, and if so, when?
So the answer is that we received a copy of the TI in response to a request from Transport Canada for the TI following the NHTSA press release.
And when was that?
I'd have to confirm the specific date.
Who ultimately made the decision to serve notice of defect here in Canada with respect to the MVSA? Was that decision made in Japan, or was it made by Toyota Canada, the sales and marketing wing?
It's a combined process.
Right. They reviewed your homework. They ultimately made the decision, though, correct?
So once they make the determination of the safety defect, then we have a role and responsibility we need to carry out.
So it seems to me, Mr. Chair, perhaps if we're looking at improving the way things work here, perhaps Transport Canada's direct relationship needs to be with Toyota Japan rather than the sales and marketing wing here in Canada. That may be one particular suggestion. I have another question for you. Are you aware of any of your suppliers in Canada issuing direction from their own legal counsel to preserve any documents, email, or other such evidence or correspondence that could point to a Toyota violation of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act or concealment of such from Transport Canada, or otherwise exonerate that supplier from such violation or concealment? I'm aware of one. I don't know if you are.
Yeah, if we're talking about suppliers to manufacturing, I don't, again, have contact with them, so I'm not aware of that communication.
And another miscellaneous question. Has any direction been given or any understanding of any kind subtly conveyed by either Toyota Motor Manufacturing or Toyota Canada to destroy any documents or emails or other such evidence or internal correspondence that could point to a Motor Vehicle Safety Act violation or concealment of such from the Minister or regulators at Transport Canada?
No, there's certainly no instruction to do that.
Okay. In a September meeting last year with Transport Canada officials, I'm referring to an email that was sent from Toyota Canada to Transport Canada, where you were, I think, commending or thanking Transport Canada for the meeting and the information on Transport Canada's work and processes. Was that vital so that you could figure out how to better game the system, Mr. Beatty?
No. In fact, that meeting was established for the purposes of introducing the entire regulatory and staff at Toyota Canada to the Transport Canada officials, with a view to ensuring that there was a full flow of communication on a regular basis between the company and Transport.
Mr. Chair, if there's any time left, Mr. Jean.
Minute and a half.
So what you're telling us today, Mr. Beattie, is that Toyota Canada had no notice of the Europe issue until after January 21st of this year.
No, that's not true. What I said was that we had not received the TI.
Okay, I'm not interested in a TI.
Oh, okay,
I'm interested in when you had notice of the Europe issue here in Toyota Canada, because remember,
right.
Toyota Europe owns 50% of Toyota Canada. Do they not? The company that owns Toyota Europe owns 50% of Toyota Canada. I mean, that's a pretty significant investment for them.
Right. So the answer to the question is that we became aware of the situation in Europe with the documentation that we were provided in support of the regulatory filing in Canada.
When?
In January.
Before or after the January 21st?
Immediately prior to.
And we're talking of this year?
Yes.
Okay. Where are those pedals manufactured? The ones that were faulty in Europe?
In Europe.
Okay. Now you've read, obviously it says in the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, it says on becoming aware of a defect in design, construction, or functioning of the vehicle or equipment that affects or is likely to affect the safety of any person, cause notice to be given of that defect.
Yes.
Two questions to you. Do you think that Toyota Canada, what it did was good enough? And number two, could have you done better?
Well, Mr. Jane, I guess there are two aspects of the question. One is we acted as soon as we had knowledge of a safety defect.
90 days after?
No, the moment that we had knowledge of the safety defect.
90 days after. You were aware Toyota had an issue here in Canada in November of 2009, and then you acted in 2010.
Right. The knowledge of an issue is different from the knowledge of a safety defect.
Okay, and Toyota Japan also had notice of it well before that. A 50% owner in Toyota Canada.
Again, at that time, Toyota Motor Corporation was investigating the pedals that had been recovered from the field.
Was that notice, Mr. Beattie? I would suggest to you that is notice. They had notice of that defect, and it would, in fact, or could cause safety issues to a consumer.
Thank you.
And I would suggest that.
Mr. Jean, I have to go to Mr. Volpe. We're in our last round. Mr. Volpe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've now insinuated Mr. McDonald into this discussion, and I can't help but share the view that Mr. Jean has just expressed, and that is that the time lag between becoming aware and actually doing something is troubling, to say the very least. But what's even more troubling, Mr. McDonald, is that you recognized that there was a problem. And in the particular case that I indicated earlier on with the Venza, it took Toyota Canada 11 weeks after you gave them an indication of your expressed concern that they might actually be in violation of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act, and you allowed them, I don't know whether you did it, whether the deputy did it, or whether you had instructions from the minister, you allowed them to wait for 11 weeks while a faulty, defective vehicle was on the road. Why would you have done that?
As I indicated earlier, Mr. Chair, whenever we feel there is a defect that deserves further pursuit, we then institute an exchange with the manufacturer, distributor, or importer. This exchange can sometimes take some time. We obviously would like issues to be dealt with as quickly as possible. That being said, we do have to give the company time to react to what we're proposing to them, to determine whether in their estimation they feel it is a safety defect, and to determine how they're going to react to it. This does take some interchange. An exchange of information.
You wouldn't have made the first notice to Toyota unless your field investigator or investigators had already gone through the engineering and scientific analysis to warrant giving them a warning. Why, after having done all of that scientific research, would you tolerate them waiting another 11 weeks before they act? Clearly, you already knew that there was a safety-related problem. You already knew that there was potential danger. Why would you let the company keep those vehicles on the road when you already had done the scientific assessment for them?
What we had, Mr. Chair, were two complaints with respect to the Venza. We felt there was an issue. We had done some analysis. We felt it deserved further follow-up with Toyota. We undertook that follow-up. Again, we would have appreciated if it was done quicker than the 11 weeks that it took. But in the end, we did get Toyota to take action on this particular issue.
Mr. McDonald, you've now admitted that you got an additional 9,000 pages of material from Toyota that you probably wouldn't have gotten if the committee hadn't become interested, that you wouldn't have gotten if the Americans hadn't pressed to get the same kind of information. And my question is this: the Americans, basing their assessment in part on material that had been gleaned from Canadian experience, were able to lay a fine, in their words, the most serious and biggest fine of its kind on Toyota, which Toyota paid willingly in order to avoid other issues. And in Canada, after receiving 9,000 sheets, all you're able to say is, we're doing an assessment of what's contained, and we don't know where we're going to go next.
As the member is no doubt aware, Mr. Chair, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act is different from the acts that govern vehicle manufacturing in the States. What we would have to do, or what we are doing here, is we have to determine whether or not Toyota Canada, the entities in Canada, Toyota Canada or Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada, knew of a safety-related defect and did not take action as a result of that. And that's the particular investigation we're undertaking. And if we do find that they were aware of the safety defect before they brought it to our attention, then we would take appropriate action in that regard.
Thank you. I have to go to Mr. Carrier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais continuer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll continue with Mr. McDonald. In the analysis that you have made of the 12,000 complaints you received that you mentioned earlier, did you get complaints regarding the accelerator that was recalled? Is that correct?
Chair, I believe I indicated that we receive about 1,200 complaints a year. If I said 12,000, I'm sorry. I meant to say 1,200. If with respect to the sticky accelerator pedal, as I indicated last time I was before the committee, we have received complaints with respect to acceleration issues, but before the notice of defect was actually brought to our attention, we did not have any particular complaint that we would have categorized as falling into the category that we are now dealing with.
Quand vous recevez une plainte
Okay. When you receive a complaint that might be dangerous, even though it is not initially proven, in your communications with the company, do you react immediately and do you ask them if they have any other complaints that they received directly that you did not? So do you make that request to really be able to analyze whether or not the problem is serious and generalized? Because in your answer to Mr. Watson earlier on, I believe, you said that you had as much cooperation from Toyota as you do from the other companies, and Toyota's headquarters are in Japan, and one might think that that's far away and that there's not good communications, but you are saying that you had good cooperation from them. But for me, that answer isn't really reassuring either, because perhaps your criteria in terms of cooperation are not very difficult, or they're not very, the bar isn't set very high. At the same time, do you think it would be reasonable to receive all of the complaints received by the companies in order to be able to really do your job on behalf of the government?
Just to, I guess, go back to the procedure for how we deal with a complaint. As we receive complaints, we investigate each and every one of those complaints. What we will do is try to determine whether or not we can replicate the problem and come up with a determination as to what the issue might be. It may be a safety issue. It may be something totally different. It may be a drivability issue. It may be an operator issue, problems the operator had. In dealing with those complaints, however, we will also contact the manufacturer and or distributor, and in this case it would be Toyota Canada, and we would advise them of complaints we've received, ask them if they've received any similar complaints, and we would analyze our own databases to see if we've received any similar complaints, to see if there is any trend here, and whether that might give us any indication with respect to a potential problem.
On est pressé par le temps.
I don't have much time. I'm sorry. In the case that concerns us here, since there was a significant recall that was put into effect by the company, and it took some time to implement, on your behalf, do you require a faster recall? Or were you as well continuing to study the problem?
Particular instances of sticky accelerator pedals before this particular issue was brought to our attention. So we were not studying that particular problem at that time. So in terms of manufacturers recalling their vehicles, as soon as they determine a safety issue, we want it done as quickly as possible. As soon as we determine a safety issue, we want it done as quickly as possible. As I indicated, there is always a certain amount of give and take, and manufacturers, for the most part, are responding appropriately. If they don't, then we have to take action under the law, which can sometimes take more time than we would like.
Thank you. I have to stop you there. Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I have any more questions for Toyota Canada. I think it's clear today that Toyota in Japan decides the critical question of what is safety and what is quality for Canadians. I think it's clear that Toyota Japan decides the critical question as to whether to issue a dealer service bulletin or a safety recall. In other words, whether or not to comply with or flout Canadian law. Mr. Chair, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act says that notice is to be served when you become aware of a defect. It's clear that it's clear that Toyota Canada, in its relationship with Toyota in Japan, is a bit like a mushroom. It's left in the dark on critical questions like that. I think it's become clear to me, Mr. Chair, these guys can't even wipe their noses unless Toyota Japan tells them that they should do it. So I'm going to defer any balance of my time to Mr. Jean or anyone else on our side who may have a question for them. I'm not sure I see the point in asking them questions.
Mr. Jean.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Watson. I lived through part of the time of gas tank explosions in the United States, from the situation there and recalls and some malmanufacture of equipment, or at least location of incorrect gas tanks. And you have to excuse me for feeling a little bit excitable about this particular issue, because I don't think brake pedals and their functioning is much different. I think it has the possibility of creating a huge situation which could lead to death and for sure bodily harm. And I think the civil liability is clear that Toyota is responsible for this, but obviously that's not the question I'm here to answer today. What my question has to do with the timeline. And that's really the issue for me, and I've had the same issue all of the meetings we've had, because clearly I don't believe that reasonable notice was followed, and that in fact Toyota did respond as they should have. And I asked the question and you never had a chance to respond, so I'm going to ask it again. Could Toyota Canada have done better, and how?
I think in the specifics of the identification of issues in the field and transmission of the information back into engineering and the subsequent steps that were followed, I'm confident that what has happened here was timely, but I recognize it hasn't given the perception of that. And
Mr. Beatty, do you really believe that a situation of a faulty brake pedal, gas pedal, and the inability to utilize a brake, a 90-day notice period when you finally culminate all the data together is sufficient? I mean, we're talking about approximately 40 different complaints that were substantiated by either Europe, the U.S., or Canada, or even Estonia. I mean, do you believe that 90 days is sufficient notice period to the regulator to do something about this? Do you really believe that?
So Mr. Jean, I would love to be able to move immediately from, the first
substantiated defects, not hints, Mr. Beatty, with respect, you've had hints for 5 years before that. We're talking substantiated cases of a defect.
So let me just go back to the technology that we're talking about here. The determination in Europe at the time was that it wasn't a safety defect, and that determination was made because of the nature of the notchiness or slow to return condition in the pedal, that was something that was controlled by normal braking in the car.
So you believe that Toyota Canada did everything it possibly could have in a reasonable time frame? Is that what you're telling us today?
What I'm saying is I wish that I were able to move faster under the specific circumstances.
Are you telling us that Toyota Canada moved fast enough under the circumstances that it was reasonable what they did?
Under the specific circumstances, we moved as promptly as we possibly could.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our guests today. I think more than anything, there seems to be, whether it's by design or bad luck, it seems like the structure at Toyota is one where less information for your other bodies seems to work best for the corporation. And I think the things that we hear about timelines, I've been in the car business, and I know when dealers got together, they shared information so that they could improve what they were doing. And it might not be a bad idea for Toyota to take some of that into consideration. But with that, I thank our guests, and as Mr. Jean has noted, the invitation may be extended again, and we would appreciate your response. So thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to just take a 1-minute break, and we have some committee business that we're going to deal with, a motion by Mr. Volpe. So as our guests are moving away from the table, we'll take a 1-minute break, come back and deal with the motion. Welcome back. Mr. Volpe has put forward a notice of motion, and it's before us right now. So I'll ask Mr. Volpe to introduce it, and if there's any debate, then we can move forward.
Thank you very much, Chairman and colleagues. As per our discussion on clause by clause on C442, where we began to bog down on some detail just prior to the conclusion of the clause by clause, I proposed this motion that we continue clause by clause consideration of Bill C442 on June the 3rd from 9 to 11, because I think we're free then. Or if witnesses are confirmed on that date, that a special meeting be called on June the 2nd. Well, we don't need to worry about that because apparently the 3rd has been freed up. So I'm looking for people's agreement on this. I'm hoping that the government will agree to continuing with clause by clause on Thursday.
Comment? Mr. Jean?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's an awesome idea.
Okay, then I will suggest that the motion has been put. All those in favor? We are going to go June 3rd from 9 to 11.
Third.
All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried, and the meeting is adjourned. Oh, Mr. Volpe?
I just wanted to ask for a point of clarification.
Yes.
Since the departmental official before us said they were looking on
I think
on my bill, yeah, it isn't over yet. I was just wondering whether Mr. Jean, on behalf of the government, is going to also look seriously at my bill and actually propose it as a government bill, rather than let it go to second reading.
Good question. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.